W.C. Faulkner.
Yeah, she was a servant.
She
I mean,
was,
slave before the Civil War, and just a regular servant
Regular
after.
servant, yes. So not actual slave, but that kind of the servant, after the Civil War. And also she may be born. Of course, she had several children before that, but she actually had maybe at least 2 children between the W.C. Faulkner and herself. Is it a fact or is it a kind of suspicious thing for that? You wrote that in your book. Maybe you are suggesting that maybe some possibility about another father's possibilities about their 2 children.
Well, yeah, when Emmeline Faulkner first appears in Ripley, she already had maybe 3 children and such as that. And at one point in Joel Williamson's book, Falkner in Southern History, he talks about as if these might have been Faulkner's children, but then a couple pages over, he says they weren't. So he kind of contradicts himself. They certainly were not, considering the time frames and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So the older children were definitely not Faulkner's. But then this girl is born in the 1860s, I believe, Fanny.
Yeah, right.
She might very well have been his child.
Yes.
But I just didn't have too much on her or any specifics about it. So, there's certainly a possibility, but I did not have much I could say about her. And so I didn't spend a lot of time speculating.
All right. Yes, actually, I think so too, because today many things can get from the internet, and I've got this one, the Mrs. Emmeline Lacey Faulkner, the tombstone, and she was born in the 1837 and died in the 1898, and she is actually living until the born of the Nobel Prize author William Faulkner was born in that. So she was actually a kind of the modern woman, and also I do not know. She seems to be a kind of the wealthy, a kind of a well-being African American person in that time, right? And she seems to be a kind of the very matured, maybe, or maybe some kind of the very enough. I don't know about her, but from my point of view, she demands a little more better life for herself and for her family, She wants to keep her own reputation, So in such a case, it's very suspicious, even for me, She actually having such a kind of the relationship with William W.C. Faulkner.
That they were friendly?
Friendly?
I mean, what is suspicious?
Suspicious means a kind of the she actually have a kind of a sexual relationship with the W.C. Faulkner. It's for me a little suspicious, because after the borning 4 the children with the other person, and after I don't know, but she demands some kind of the support from the W.C. Faulkner, maybe, but at the same time, and she actually have some kind of the I don't know, shameful relationship with the W.C. Faulkner. How do you feel about that?
I think that relationships back then were probably more complicated than we realize today. Today, the more left-wing vision of things always emphasizes the dominant party over the subservient party and how exploitative it was. And I would say that there was probably more complex in relationships, and it's probably not one of just enmity, and there was probably a lot of good relationships.
All right.
Emmeline was living, I believe, in 1880 at Thurman's place, presumably a worker at Thurman's. And when she died, Mrs. Thurman,
Yes.
who was a miller, she was the sister to Dr. John Murray, second wife. But anyway, Mrs. Thurman wrote a little letter to the newspaper about Emmeline, speaking of her in the most superlative terms about what a good person she was. And it would sound like she got along with people. People liked her. People liked her in general. She was a good person.
Right. And but actually, it is maybe a fact that the W.C. Faulkner supports the Emmeline Faulkner and Emmeline Faulkner's family, and her daughter, maybe the Fanny, actually get a very good education at that
right.
time, and she became a kind of the representative person in her area, right? And I found that her, she, maybe this is her, might be,
Right.
And yes, and she became a kind of the very representative guy at that area, at that person, and she seems to be, when she was, she died, she actually written on the paper about her death, So it means that W.C. Faulkner seems to be a very good supporter of her family, right?
Presumably, yeah.
Right, yes. That's a very interesting story, actually. So I mean that W.C. Faulkner is a very generous guy and very, a kind of very supportive to the other person, especially for his friends, right? And
There's one other thing. I don't remember if I mentioned this in the book, but when Falkner was shot on Main Street
yes,
in Ripley, they carried him 2 blocks
yes,
down to his daughter's house.
yes.
Well, the people that rushed in to help, one of them that's mentioned is a guy named Sam Edgerton, who was a black barber in the town,
Yeah.
came in to help. What it does not mention is that Sam Edgerton was Emmeline's son-in-law. He was married to her daughter. Not Fanny, but one of the older daughters,
Oh, yeah, right.
So there's this family connection there. He was Emmeline's son-in-law, but he came when Faulkner was shot. He was over there assisting, do what he could, and then they put him on a mattress, I believe, and carried him 2 blocks down the street to the, actually about 3 blocks down to the Carter house.
Yeah, but it was a very shocking, story about that for the people in there, I've actually been to the Ripley, 2 or 3 times, and I realized that, this is a very small area, It's a small square, and everyone knows that, when someone was shot, it might be a very tragic story, in that area, I think. So, so it was a kind of the very shocking story for that area's people, and even after that, maybe after his death, that his family brought his statue, W.C. Faulkner's marble statue from the Italy to America, and they established in the Ripley's, the grave, and after that, someone was shooting that 2 fingers or 3 fingers of the right hand. I saw that too, and it was a kind of the very also aftermath, a kind of tragic ones happened, but still people are feeling some much more kind of the very anti, actually, or a kind of the very negative sometimes emotions some people are having about him. But at the same time, many people are supporting him. He is a kind of the leader of the local area, and he is a kind of the person who should be respected from many people. How do you think about this situation? In such a kind of the very small town, people are divided. Maybe many people, many relatives are supporting the W.C. Faulkner, but at the same time, some people are very enmity or very actually having a bad feeling about him. Is that such a kind of thing happened in that day, around the 20th century? Beginning of the 20th century.
I suppose so. You always have differences of opinion on anything, and people are always taking different sides. And that evidence of that child being born about that time, his parents named him Colonel Falkner Thurman. It was like they were making their statement. We might be Thurmans, but we're not part of that Thurman. We're supporters of Colonel Faulkner.
Yeah, right. It's a kind of the total changing of their attitude, right?
Right.
Yes.
And I can't imagine anything but the majority of the people liking him or supporting him. Colonel Faulkner.
Yeah, even today, when you go to the Ripley place, and if you're looking at the statue of the W.C. Faulkner, his statue still is a kind of the very highest, very symbolical position in that globe, I think. And at the same time, he is his tombstone is well preserved now. Very clean, very clean, and many people visited there. So it's a very, for me, he is a kind of course, he is a very typical 19th century person, He is a very, very aggressive, and he is very too much ambitious about his own political position or something else. But at the same time, he is a very romantic person, very delicate. And he is also a kind of the soft side, in a way, to the other people, in a very positive way or a very negative way for me. And but at the same time, what kind of this is my image, but what kind of the image do you have as in total about the W.C. Faulkner? Is he a kind of the very typical gentleman of the South, or do you have any other ideas or some images about him?
Oh, I would have said it's fairly typical, but there's, typical is sort of a middle construct. And he was certainly different than most of them.
Unique person.
Yeah, I think just this self-deprecatory sense of humor. I think most of the people in his position wouldn't have been so ready to laugh at themselves.
Yeah, when I read the Rapid Rambling in Europe, some scenes are very funny for me. He is climbing up some kind of the statue or lion or something, on the, so he is a kind of the childish sometimes. Yeah, very, very interesting.
And then he claims he had this dream at Stratford-on-Avon. He fell asleep and he had this dream of all these characters from Shakespeare appearing. And of course, I'm sure he made that up. But he said he was there asleep until he felt something in his ear. You know, some woman sticking a flower stem into his ear
Yeah.
to tickle him.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and that makes him look a little bit foolish, and of course, but there's his sense of humor. He could laugh at himself.
All right. Yeah. That's true. So he is a
And then the thing about the little girl that they were down in the crypt in Rome, and the little girl came up and was pulling on his fingers, trying to pull one off, and then he moved, and she hollered out. She said, "Mama, this mummy is alive."
yeah.
And about that, I had a development after this book came out.
Yep.
You may or may not have heard of it. This picture, of course, appears in Rapid Ramblings. After this book came out, Falkner's cousin from Texas sent me an email and said, "This may not be of interest to you, but I have a photograph of Colonel Falkner." And it was this, but it was in a photographer's studio. It had Falkner here and had a little girl, and you could tell his setting was a photographer's studio with kind of these painted landscapes and such. So the background was done to make it look like he was down underground or something. But this is Colonel Falkner, and they took a photograph, and then the artist made this lithograph based on a photograph. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because up until the time the book came out, I knew of only 2 photographs of him. And I wished to heck I had known that there was another photograph. I would have certainly included it and put these 2 side by side.
So it's a kind of very interesting. He is a kind of self-producing himself, you know.
Yeah.
He is creating his own image and reproduce again, acting out such a kind of the thing. Even in America.
The girl thinks the little girl thought he was a mummy, and he kept referring to himself several times as the mummy.
All right, yeah, it's a very interesting, you know, and such a kind of the self-producing or some kind of the creating of your own self image is very, very fascinating for him. I think, you know, W.C. Faulkner, he is actually posing such a kind of the very, in a way, very stylish pose in front of the people and make them eat a statue, kind of. So it's a kind of a very interesting side of himself for me.